One of the advantages, or let's say benefits, for the financial industry or FIRE has been the falling price of credit. Now, within the long wave, we come to understand that as the monetary wave. And this is a precursor for banking crisis and credit crisis. And the reason is really simple, is that the price of credit has been in a secular fall, or falling, so to speak, right? And what that does is able to facilitate record indebtedness and, of course, Ponzi finance. Now, if you look at this is Australia's 5-year yield. I just want to show that this is global. We can see that since about 81, this is globally, the price of credit, you've seen it's been in a secular decline. If we think of the rules of a growth industry, and if you think technology really fits that, right? It's deflationary because the price and performance of that technology increases adoption rate. But the most important is its price. And we've always known this thing here, right? The cell phone everybody has. And the reason that cell phone is in the hands of most people on the planet today is that its price has been falling since it was introduced 30 years ago. Well, actually longer, but let's say when the modern day type of cell phone. Now, the performance, of course, has improved dramatically. Now, let's take that lesson and information and apply it to the financial industry. And you can see that obviously the benefit has been its product or service has become cheaper. So the majority of people don't look at how big their mortgage is. They look at how much they can carry or their cash flow. Well, so they're always, let's see how much you qualify. And of course, at the peak here in 82, 16%. I mean, look at October 2020, 0.3%. So how much leverage could you purchase? Does that make sense? So the monetary wave is always a precursor to the banking crisis and a credit crisis. And that's, of course, that capital went into where? The most leveraged asset on the planet, which is real estate. So now that that's over, and I've actually highlighted, this is not just in Canada, the United States, but it's in Europe. And we're even starting to see the stresses from Japan. So again, notice these long-term secular decline since here in 81, 82 in Australia. It's the same no matter most countries, developed world. And then they collapse from 2018 into 2020. And notice now we've had a rise here, and it's broken the long-term secular declines, albeit a small amount. But when you've leveraged from zero, but there's no historical precedent, you're going to cause something. And what we can see is that something is Australia's real estate bubble. Now look at this chart really clearly. You can see from 1970 up until 1987, and that was the first, it just pretty much just went sideways, real home prices. And there was a mini bubble, and that, interesting enough, is so similar to Canada. It's interesting. If you look at most asset bubbles in the developed world, they really start getting a life of their own in 1996. I believe the large part it has to do with demographics, but you can see it pretty much went sideways. And from its peak, just like Canada, 89 to about 1999, 2000, there was no secular rise. And look at that secular rise since 1996. There's peaks and values, and we have the blow off there in 2022. And this is very common. So without the falling price of credit, that's going to stop price appreciation. And if we take a look at price appreciation in nominal terms here in Australia, you can see the peaks and valleys. But notice something here, that the secular trend is to the downside. So you wonder what will drive prices, if possible, in the future. Now that the secular rise or fall in interest rates, it's over, or is over. Now, the big concern, as with Canada, is this. Look at the secular trend of GDP. And if you don't know the story, with Japan, after its massive real estate bubble burst, it had a huge significance to its GDP because the economy, as with Australia and Canada and a large part in Europe and the United States, it's financialized. Most of the growth in GDP we're getting from the fire industry. And so when that bursts, then this whole system starts to implode, and then the economy needs to reset and reset toward the real economy. Well, this, of course, will end Kondratieff's fourth wave that started in 1946. And if you're not aware, there's 4 seasons. We're still in fall. Economic winter is going to be obvious. Economic depression, similar to the 30s, 1875 to 1896, 1832 to 1845. I mean, it's a credit contraction because, well, you're not able to leverage anymore, right? Ray Dalio calls it the big debt cycles. There's a super cycle of debt. There's many names toward this thesis, but you can see this is where economic winter becomes the most important part of the cycle, in that you're there to, or be concerned about preserving your wealth. And by the way, as with most countries, that's all phantom wealth because it's built on credit, not income. If you measure, and again, we're trying to keep this simple and short as possible, but the most important thing you can see here is the secular trend, and it will impact dramatically the growth rates. That, of course, will probably more than likely be negative in the future, and it'll be global. There'll be a global credit contraction and a deleveraging because basically asset prices are just overpriced. So this is another example of the monetary wave, and it's not just centered in Canada, the United States, or Europe. It's Australia and New Zealand. Okay, as I mentioned previously, that everything regarding the financial aspect of the long wave now will be shifting to Substack, and I'm just going to focus on the model itself and anything to do with finance, right? Something like this. I won't get into the political cycle or learning about the long wave. The website will do that. Twitter or X, sorry, Elon. X, you'll find, a general information, how economic winter will impact the political revolution, the social cycle as it turns dark, civil unrest, war. There's many aspects of the long wave, and of course technology, right? Technology is the most important part of the long wave because the technological revolution or creative destruction will come from technology. The creative destruction will also occur in everything that pretty much was built around the world post 1946. It no longer works. Hence, you get the Kondratieff cycle because it's just at the end part is just a buildup of unproductive, unsustainable debt, and the real economy can't support the casino, which is primarily in the real estate market. I hope that makes sense in another understanding of the monetary wave. And as always, if you have questions or anything like that and you post, I appreciate that. I read the comments, of course. If there's needed clarification, and if I can in another vlog, of course I'll do that. But this is part of the education of the long wave, because this is not taught, right? It's basically Keynesian economics or Marx, or is the economic philosophy. And the long wave, there's numerous books and articles, which you can find on my website, of how this is cyclical. And it makes sense to anyone that understands everything has a cycle. So where governments And central banks believe they can thwart this. Well, they proved that they haven't. If anything, they've created the largest credit bubble in history. So I always find it interesting where a lot of people believe that governments can prevent what's coming. The challenge, unlike Japan in '89 or in 1929, definitively in Canada, the United States, is governments were fiscally responsible. Australia is a little bit better than Canada, but governments are spendthrifts and they're spending money. This is just part of the political cycle. Focus on the short term, not worrying about the debt. But, the drinking will catch up to you. The unsustainable, unproductive credit will catch up to you. And that's what we hate. That's inevitable. We don't want to admit that there is a limit how much governments can indebt themselves or tax or devalue the currency. I mean, what else can they do? And each of those, I was taught, well, governments can always devalue the currency, governments can always print, governments can always go more, well, there's limits. And the limits are determined by the market. Hence, what we mean about the market is the people that actually purchase the assets or decide, no, we're not going to buy any more bonds. One thing is to keep in mind, and I'll address this in the future, there is a point where the government debt becomes so large, and you've seen this in Japan, it just crowds out the private sector. And they have to sell their bonds, and the problem is that you have these deflationary forces, one from demographics, and two from technology, and three, unproductive credit in the real estate sector. Those are three massive deflationary forces. This is not Argentina, which its private credit is non-existent, so it can inflate and have its sister interest rates go to 60-70%, and it doesn't do anything to the economy. When you're a credit-based economy, Australia, Canada, Europe, United States, New Zealand, it's very sensitive to the rise in rates. And so we've had this small rise, and it dramatically impacts everything because people are levered to the monetary wave. And that's coming to an end. Anyways, I hope you like this. Don't forget to subscribe. Let others know who would be interested in the vlog. And I'm going to mention it, but this Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'll be recording the first. I'll do this monthly of helping people go through the real estate downturn. Just some insights, education, what you can do. I went through it, so I'm an expert. And I really can say that where most people, they say they're real estate experts or financial experts, and you're not until you've gone through a bear market and how well you performed. Understanding what's coming now, the stress to the families, your finances, your decisions, your dreams, your beliefs will change dramatically. And I went through that, so I will articulate that. Anyways, I've said enough. Hope you found this informative. And as always, we will talk soon.